And it's part of a series of books that I've written. And it became a series because I kept wanting to add more and more content in. And there comes a limit of how much you can put into one particular book. So I kind of broke it up. And when I started working with these competencies, I discovered something really quite powerful, something that when we look at skills for the future, the list of skills changes all the time. The World Economic Forum puts out a set of skills, and all the big consulting firms put out their favorite, skills for the next 5 years or 3 years or, 180 days. But beneath those skills is a set of competencies, and you almost want to think of it like a lattice work that your skills need to rest on top of. If we don't have these competencies, then we could have a skill, but we still won't be able to apply it properly. We still won't be able to be ready for the future because that is missing. So that is part of what we want to explore today. And I want to start with a question. In fact, there's a lot of questions here. I probably don't have a lot of answers, but I do have lots of questions. Are we good? I was just hearing a bit of sound there. If I can ask you just to mute yourself. And Bruce, if I can, I'm going to just make you co-host. If you can just pick up anything that looks a little odd. Thank you. All right, so we want to look at a couple of questions that will prime us for thinking. I did a presentation with a couple of other presenters with some content over the last few days, and the speaker before me had really dense content, and he gave the delegates a lot of homework. And when he left the room, I said to the delegates, I don't think there's a prize for the best presenter, but I just want you to know I'm not giving you homework. So they all rated me the best presenter. But I don't want to give you homework. I don't want to add a burden to you of more things that you have to learn, even though I'm introducing to you concepts that you'll need to learn, but rather to kind of set the scene and to prime your brain to think about and identify and look for these opportunities or evidence of the lack of something. And the more we become primed for them, the easier it will be to actually embrace them, rather than just having this huge amount of content that you're supposed to somehow be able to kind of address. And I want to start with this kind of question about what is the quiet anxiety in leadership. And feel free to put into the chat if you've got any, actual opinions or examples of anything like that. I know also that I'm speaking about leadership, but it's not just for leaders who are in a position on a board or who've got some title before or after their name. All of us have influence in our circles, in the places where we work, in the groups that we engage with. And that influence is leadership. So it doesn't have to be official leadership, but it could be just how we are working with other people. So to think about it in a slightly broader sense. I am very fortunate to work as a futurist, but, whoa, I bounced, but also as a professional speaker. And I've held some leadership roles in our speaking world. In the Professional Speakers Association of Southern Africa, I'm a past president, as is Bruce. I'm also past president of the Global Speakers Federation. And especially in that role, I got to deal with leaders of the speaker associations around the world. And the reason I'm traveling is to kind of get these perspectives of how we deal with futures issues in different parts of the world. But this leadership uncertainty we have and anxiety there's so many layers to it. It could be because we're not ready for a leadership role that we're suddenly thrust into, or that we think we're competent and we're good at what we're doing, and then it dawns on us that there are other things going on that we haven't seen yet because we didn't have enough leadership experience. Or it could be that we're doing the best we can and something comes along like COVID. And COVID came, and global pandemic, and everybody has to respond, and there are decisions around the world and people arguing and pointing the finger. And sort of the summary of our experience with leadership during COVID times is that, okay, we've had that experience now, we've learned from that. We'll be able to handle another pandemic. We got all the things in place. We'll be able to respond quicker next time or better next time. only the next disruption is not likely to be the repeat of a previous disruption. It's going to be something different. Like, for example, a war in Iran that suddenly makes countries getting fuel a bit of like a roulette wheel about who's going to get fuel or not, and who's going to be able to get through that strait. And we're traveling next week to Vietnam, and Vietnam is having, certain rules in place now that businesses will be closed and public places will be closed on certain days to try and save some of this fuel so that the country doesn't run out. So it has all of these other disruptions. So there is this constant anxiety in leadership and ambition to grow and take on this mantle, but then this concern about whether we will be ready or not, and what are the other things that are going to come along that are going to challenge us. So some people do operate under this illusion of preparedness. I'll just say very briefly, working with the speaker associations, we try very hard to build up this a kind of line of succession so that people with experience are ready to step into the next leadership role. And time after time, organization after organization, something happens and that is all disrupted. And we realize that we're not as prepared with the full set of skills that we need. And that's just for today. So very often we got good strategy documents, but we confuse our planning with actually being prepared. We confuse our communication with actual alignment between our departments or between the different groups of people we're working with. We confuse what has been called innovation theatre, doing something novel for the sake of looking innovative, but we haven't actually adapted and actually responded with the innovation that is required. So we can keep ourselves quite entertained in a leadership position without actually delivering anything of real value. And I'm not going to get into politics, but just choose a country, have a look, consider what leaders are up to these days, and what is the real value of that leadership that we're seeing or not seeing. Now, I'm sure you know this particular poem. It's quite long, but it's been summarized into this. And when I was preparing, I thought this is the exact right example for this. There are capacities that are missing in our leadership range of tools. And whose responsibility is it to have those capacities, or to make sure that somebody in the leadership team has those capacities? Well, there was an important job to be done, and everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that because it was everybody's job, but everybody thought anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. And it ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done. And that really is what we're dealing with in terms of futures capacity. So when we sit around a leadership table, when we look at an organizational chart, when we look at our associations and organizations, when we look at our own work and our own preparedness in our own careers for the future, there's lots of labels that we have to look at. There's lots of different logistics and, financial issues and other things that need to be planned. But who has the label futurist on the board? And who is taking that label of futurist and really unpacking what it means in terms of having the capabilities, the competencies that we need? So if any of you are resonating with any of that right now, just give me an indication in the chat box. I'm not going to ask you to do anything lame or dumb, but just let me know if this resonates with you while I have a sip of my coffee. Yep, Bruce, I know that you do. David, Marty, Geraldine, Malcolm, yes. So you're all recognizing that, which is good. So what are these capabilities, capacities, competencies that we need to look at? And like I said, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions so that we can explore what this means. The first one is, think about the last important decision you made. To pause for a moment and think about the last important big decision you made in your personal life, in your professional career, or something, a big decision made in the company or organization that you're working in. It's a big decision, but how far into the future did you actually consider its consequences? Where are you thinking this is the right decision for, we need to make this decision now? Is this the right decision for the next quarter? Because we'll get sales, we'll get profits, we'll be able to do something. Is this the right decision for next year, for the next set of leaders who will take over from these particular leaders? And those questions about how far into the future we are thinking is really important, because that is the competency of strategic foresight. It is to anticipate what may emerge and to consider what we're doing today and its long-term consequences. In the so-called, broadly speaking, Western world, there is what they call, I love these words that people just make up, quarteritis. It is the tendency for companies to make decisions based on next quarter, the next, like Q2, Q3. What is going to be the bottom line? What are the KPIs that we have to report on in the next 3 months? And that is what the focus is, to do something now for them. In the broadly speaking Eastern world, there is an appreciation for something that happens over a much longer period of time. And one of my favorite stories is about an old bonsai master craftsman. And it takes a very long time from when you plant a bonsai seed or sapling for it to grow to maturity before you can start really working with it as a bonsai plant to creating something amazing. And those bonsais they can last for hundreds of, I mean, they're just small trees, but they can last for hundreds of years. But this one bonsai master was still planting seeds and saplings when he was in his late 80s. He would never see those plants mature, but this was part of what he did. He saw the foresight of other people being able to take those plants onto maturity. How far ahead are we thinking? And we might think that because we've got like a savings plan and a retirement annuity plan, that we're okay, but we really need to kind of stretch our thinking about how we are looking at the future. When we look at futures thinking, that's the phrase we very often use when we talk about what a futurist does. And I like to say that everybody's a natural futurist because we're all thinking about the future. I mean, you're on this webinar right now because you want to learn something, because you think it will have value for the future. So you're all natural futurists. The more academic name for it is strategic foresight. But if we just brought it down to a competency, strategic foresight is this intention to consider the future, and to see to anticipate what may emerge, and not to just believe that our hopes and dreams and wishes will come true, and not to just hope that we've made a plan and that plan will work, or that we're really competent, so we're sure we can improvise in the moment. That isn't strategic foresight. That's just really wishful thinking. I love bonsais. Saw some gorgeous ones here in KL the other day. All right, so that's our very first competency, is to consider our strategic foresight. And it's not strategic planning, which is already on the board, but strategic foresight also looks at like scenarios and what could happen, or worst case scenario, best case scenario, or other variables. So it's a little bit more intentional about looking at the range of ways that the future could emerge, rather than planning really well for one particular way and maybe having a plan B. That's your first one. The second question I want to ask is, where in your role or in the organization that you're working in, have you worked on a problem, solved a problem, addressed an issue, only to discover that it created another problem somewhere else? And this is the foundation of silo thinking, which we hear about quite often. Silo thinking is when we feel like everything is encapsulated in this little neat bubble, and it doesn't affect other things. So we can happily work here and it's not going to have an impact somewhere else. I often use the example to explain what this is, which is systems thinking. When we consider the Amazon rainforest, now I've never been to the rainforest, but Imagine you were standing there in the Amazon rainforest, on the edge, not like deep inside where there's all, insects and animals, but like you're looking at this incredibly luscious, beautiful environment with animals and plants, and it's gorgeous, and there's a humidity in the air. At what point would you think that the only reason the Amazon rainforest is as gorgeous and luscious as it is because of the desert, the Sahara Desert on the African continent? And apparently, with weather patterns, wind picks up the nutrient-rich soil from the Sahara Desert, takes it all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, drops it in the Amazon rainforest, and that is what makes that part of the world so lush and beautiful. Those two different environments exist. The Amazon only exists because of the system that it's in that feeds it from another continent. And that's what systems thinking is. It's looking at the whole system at work, not just looking at one thing, saying, all I have to do is solve this problem, and it doesn't matter who else is affected down the line or downstream. I just have to get this work done, and I don't care about the consequences. Or I want these rules in place because it makes me feel like I'm in control, and I don't care what that means for customer service or customer experience or anything else. So we need to be able to see a bigger system in place. And the more we see that, the more integrated, the more collaborative, the more we can co-create opportunities, because we're seeing a whole system in place, not just individual items. Our next competency is an interesting one. Where are you currently expected? Where are you expected to have all the answers? Where you don't have all the answers, or where the situation is still unfolding? And this is a leadership question. I love watching science fiction, and my husband and I are watching the Voyager series, Star Trek, for probably, I don't want to exaggerate, about the fifth or sixth time that we've watched the entire series in the years that we've been together. We are super fans. But I love watching Catherine Janeway, the captain of the Voyager, encounter various problems. And now, because I know the stories really well, I can watch for certain things that I'm looking for. And the last couple of episodes that we just watched have been heartbreaking, because I identify so strongly with her, but I'm looking at her having to make decisions that are absolutely horrible. Decisions that are perhaps morally right or perhaps technically correct, but they have consequences on other people. Times when she has to make the decision to pull the plug, to let something fail for something else to exist, to do the right thing, which means that her crew is going to be stranded in the Delta Quadrant for hundreds of years, and they can't get home. And the struggle that she goes through, it's very easy for us to look at leaders and say, they're getting it wrong, or they should have known better, or how could they make a decision like that? I know a number of times where people have pointed at my leadership and judged me, and I'm going, you have no idea the number of hours and, to be honest, the number of tissues I've gone through to get to the point where I knew that this was a decision that I, with all the integrity I could, this is the decision I had to make. And I know that it has affected other people, but I've had to make it, and I have to live with the consequences. But as we grow and develop, as that influence changes, as we learn new things, we need to respond in different ways. And that is adaptive leadership. And I apologize to the poor model of this particular mini video that I caught her in a moment where her eyes look like she's having a stroke. That was an accident. So what do we do in those moments? Do we hold our position and say, I'm just going to go ahead with the information that I have? Do we allow ourselves to rethink, to adjust our thinking? Do we consult with other people? Do we just make it democratic and make it somebody else's problem and say, I didn't make this decision, they did? Or do we hold on to a decision that we're making? And how we do that in leadership, in influence, in our lives, in our families, that is an incredibly important competency to develop, to be able to know and trust yourself that you are a good enough leader or influencer, you're a good enough leader to be in a position, but you're still open to learning. and you're still open to new information, and you're open to changing direction if you need to do that. That is really important. In times of crisis, in times when there is a lot of uncertainty, many people revert to a very black and white view of the world. And they say, it's like this, there are no options. And they hold fast to that dogmatic position, and they refuse to yield. Not necessarily because they really truly believe that that is the best choice, but because the only certainty they have is around that role, that position, because they have no certainty about all the other variables in the world. So they'll hold on to that certainty because it makes them feel a little bit safer. It regulates their nervous system. It gives them something to trust in a world that is confusing and bewildering. And they're trusting it even if it's wrong, even if part of them knows it's wrong, even if they drive people away from them who can see that it's wrong. That is really poor leadership. But we have plenty of examples of that around the world today. All right, let's change tack and talk about something nicer. There's a really cute story I heard years ago about a public swimming pool, and there's a little girl in the swimming pool, and she's got her little swimming cap on, and her younger sister is standing on the edge of the pool, and she's trying to coax her little sister to jump in. So come in, jump. And the little sister is like getting her hands ready and getting her legs ready, and then she kind of wiggles back away from the edge. I'm scared. And the sister calls her, no, come, you can jump in, you must just dive in. And the little girl comes close, she goes, I'm scared. And there's another lady, an older lady there near them, and she's bobbing around in the water watching this. And then she calls to the little girl standing on the side of the pool, and she says, I know you're scared. Do it scared. Do it anyway. Do it scared. We have this illusion that somehow we will find all those answers. We will find all of the things we need, and there will be clarity and certainty. That we will be calm going into a situation, that we'll find this magical quantum flow in our brains, and that everything will be smooth going forward. But most of our lives, we have to do it scared and do it anyway. When was the last time you or your team tried something that genuinely might not work, that you tried just for the experience of trying? When was the last time you tried to learn to do something that you weren't good at? I come from a very creative family, and I'm trying to learn how to draw, and my drawings are embarrassing. My stick figures are embarrassing. And when I have a mother and a daughter who are as talented as they are, it's really awkward. But we need to do these things scared. We need to do new things. We need to have new experiences, and we need to cultivate this in our workplaces for the future, for the sake of the future. We need to develop innovation and creativity. We need to learn to generate what does not yet exist. Or, and this is the real version of innovation, is to take something that exists somewhere else and to take that concept and be able to apply it somewhere else. That is really strategic futures thinking, when you can learn from one part of the world, from something else, and apply it somewhere that it has a result, that it has a benefit to people. And if it's been a while, and just think about it, maybe it's like starting bonsais, but what is stopping you from personally trying something new, having an experiment, trying a new craft, or trying to work on a project in the workplace that may or may not work? We keep kind of moving closer and closer to this concept of efficiency and KPIs, and having to be able to measure everything and know what the ROI is on every single activity. But that is not going to allow us the space and the freedom to innovate and to create. So we need to be able to have that experience. If anybody has done anything like that, then let us know in the chat box. All right, so we're going to move on to another question. We're going from a nice, cool pool to a long drive here on this freeway. Oops. I don't know if it's moving or not. Anyway, so this is the question. What issue in your organization do you already know is coming, but hasn't become urgent yet? What do you know is already coming, but hasn't become urgent yet? And I don't know, as I was putting this particular slide deck together, I thought that I could go off on a total tangent here and talk about neurotypical people and neurodivergent people, because I'm pretty sure that we approach this differently. But as somebody with ADHD, and I have a daughter with ADHD, there's a lot of things that I know are coming. And I know they're coming, but I still can't quite respond to them in time, not until the brain chemistry has like done some little magic thing, and then all of a sudden I can act on it. There used to be those little signs in the side mirrors of a car that said, you know, be aware that objects in this rearview mirror are closer than they appear. And we can put the same thing onto the front of our calendars and say, be aware that items in your calendar are closer than they may appear, because suddenly the days just move and a new event is on top of you and you haven't prepared for it. And this is about anticipatory planning. And this is probably the most practical of these competencies, because we can all do this. We all know that this needs to be done, but it's still a subset of strategic foresight and futures thinking, because we need to be able to prepare before the pressure arrives. And the preparing isn't just for the project. The preparing is preparing our thinking for this. So, for example, we know that we need new skills for the future. We know that there is new things that we need to learn, and we're going to need to respond, and we're going to need to be agile, and disruptions could happen very quickly, and innovation cycles are shorter than they ever have been, and we get, you know, we can get anxious about all of those things, and we cannot actually prepare for all of those things because we don't know what they are yet. So how do we prepare? Well, we prepare by developing these competencies. We prepare by not overcommitting in our calendars or in our lives or in our brains to too many projects, so that we're able to respond faster to new opportunities. We prepare by making sure that the people in our team are healthy physically and psychologically, beg your pardon, that our team is healthy, so that when these disruptions happen, we've got margin, we've got space, we've got capacity to be able to respond. So sometimes it's not just the practical thing that we know is coming, but it's actually the preparedness, the preparedness for what is next. KPIs, killing people's innovation. Bruce, that is brilliant. Beg your pardon, I love that. That's really good. All right, so I am a Star Trek fan, but I also play around sometimes with Star Wars. And communication skills, this they do not have. And this is the indication of the next competency we need is strategic communication. And strategic communication is interesting because we very often have people working hard in the organization, doing really good work, but we don't all know if these people are aligned, if they're working together in the same direction, and we don't always realize, you know, one department doesn't realize what another department is doing. Or you have a marketing department that launches some content out into the public, and the other departments that have to actually deliver on that weren't aware, and then that kind of information is lacking. Strategic communication is really important because it means that we need to be able to adjust our communication styles for different things. One of these, as an example, is they call it code switching. So when you listen to your teenagers speak to their friends, and then they speak to a respected teacher or something like that, they might suddenly speak in a different code. They'll speak in a different language. They'll use different words. There'll be fewer likes when they speak to somebody who's more senior. There may be way fewer swear words. They will use other kinds of, or they'll use fewer pieces of slang, but they may use more jargon. One of the things I really get stressed about in organizations that I work with, the big corporates, is they use so much jargon that the jargon creates, all the acronyms and things like that. It creates these little shortcuts in the brain that the minute you say the word, they immediately know what it means and they stop thinking. They don't need to think, because that word encapsulates a set of ideas in their brains, and they know what that means and they know what to do with it. But they haven't actually communicated through that to understand what is really going on. So some of my favorite work that I'm doing right now is working with a really great financial company. They've got a fantastic marketing strategy. But when we look at the marketing strategy document, it is so full of jargon and so heavy with content that it feels inaccessible. And so we spent a whole day using a whole other set of metaphors and analogies to unpack where they're going. And every time we got an idea of this is where we're going, then I could tie it back to this line in your strategy document. And that means that line in your strategy document. And to see that kind of now come alive, suddenly they know what their strategy document means because they've worked with it and they've been able to have this conversation around it that makes it more meaningful than it was before. So our strategic communication is really important. I certainly overshare information all the time. So sometimes we may need to hold some information back. Sometimes we should be a little bit more generous. We need to slow communication down when necessary. We really need to think about how we communicate. Going into the future means that there's a lot of anxieties and uncertainties. And the minute we assume we know what somebody means with a little bit of few words or a phrase or two, that's a risk that we haven't fully unpacked what that could mean. And it could mean that we spend a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of emotion even moving in a direction that isn't actually helpful. So we certainly need to slow down. It's probably one of the best things I've learned as I've got older is to be slower. Who knows how slow I'll be in the future. All right. This brings me to the most amusing little picture I found online. I'm sure we all know what Enron is, that big energy company that was involved in a huge scandal a couple of years ago. It's one of those shortcut memes. So, we immediately know what Enron is. The question is, have you ever made a decision that made sense commercially, made sense in the moment, but didn't sit entirely comfortably with you? Have you had to make decisions that just made you feel uncomfortable and you weren't sure why? Have you thought about something as how it might unfold in the future and wondered what that might mean in terms of ethics? Sorry, just had to press a button here. This was a Christmas gift that somebody was going to give during this 99 to 2000 year period. Our ethical questions in the future are incredibly difficult to deal with, mostly because the ethical problems we're dealing with right now are so bizarre. There are things that we know to be wrong. We know them to be wrong, and other people are happily doing them and flaunting them. And that means that other people who have a bit of a gray line when it comes to ethics are saying, if some people can get away with this, why can't I? And then other people who are holding a fast line to some kind of ethical standard then look like old stick in the muds and they don't really know what's going on in the world. So it's a very messy space. But the question here is, and I asked this question, I'll show some kind of personas in a moment. I ask this question because I believe people who would be engaging with this conversation would be people who intend to create a more preferred future, a better future. How we define better is something we all need to negotiate. But if we want a better future, it would be more inclusive. It would be it would be better for more people. It would be more ethical. It wouldn't be a future that extracts and steals value from others for the sake of only one small in group. Those people are not creating a strategic future. They're just protecting their own interests. So when we look at this, we need to sit with those uncomfortable questions. We say, when we're making this decision, what will it mean for the future? What are the implications for generations to come? Are we stealing from the next generation of people who will live on this planet? Are we creating something that will be very profitable right now, but in about 5 years' time, we would have poisoned the rivers, destroyed the soil, and left with our profits and left a whole community of people here destitute because the business has moved on? That is that ethical decision making that we need to be exploring for the future. That was the 7th competency. So let me kind of sum these up for you because there's quite a few. So we have, just moving things around, we have strategic foresight skills, systems thinking, adaptive leadership, innovation and creativity, anticipatory planning, strategic communication, and ethical decision making. And when we pull all of these competencies together, we can build on them. But these competencies then become like this DNA, this kind of internal structure that holds everything together into the future so that we can build onto it. So now that we know what the competencies are, we're aware of it. And that's my homework to you. It's like you're aware of these things. You know, I'll give you a screenshot of that later on so that you can check them off. But now that you're aware of it, you'll start to be able to identify it in yourself or in other people or in things that you're reading or hearing about. You'll be able to start identifying the existence or the lack of those particular competencies. But it's one thing knowing about them. What do we do? How do we measure them? I do have an assessment, which I know some of you have done, and I will send links later on so that you can do the assessment. What I haven't included in the assessments up until now. So if you have done the assessment, don't do it again. I've got all your details. I'll send this to you anyway. But I want to introduce to you these 5 personas, the 5 levels of preparedness for the future. And so if you did the assessment and you get a low score, if you're looking at anybody else and you say that person just really does not have a clue about the future, then that might be somebody who is at the very first level. It'll come up any minute now. Of someone who is a present bound performer. So a person who is there, they're present bound. They're in this moment, they're doing their daily work, but they're almost operating entirely within today's realities. Business as usual, just whatever is on their list, whatever somebody is telling them to do today. They are very vulnerable to the future because they don't have time to look up and see what is coming, or they don't have the capacity yet to realize their role in a wider and a longer system. A person who moves on from that, who starts to gain a little awareness about the future, is a person who is a reactive operator. So they're very capable and experienced. They're doing a good job, but their approach to the future is largely shaped by still these short-term demands. Like, yeah, Q1, Q2, but I've got to get this done. So they're very easily disrupted by changes that happen, but they're just trying to get just a little bit further ahead. And this is okay because everybody, just think about young people starting their careers, where we all go through these stages. But when we're at like our general age here, we should be progressing. The third stage, when a person becomes more aware of the future, is that they become an adaptive navigator. Now they're trying to navigate the future. They're aware that the future requires new ways of thinking, but they're still developing the skills to do that. They're very aware of what they don't have in terms of those skills, and they can see, but they can't quite identify or name or anticipate just yet. But they're getting there. They're starting to develop the skill set. Our 4th level, as we go up now, is the strategic pathfinder. And this is a person who's going, I'm serious about the future. I want to be prepared. I want to work in an organization or in a team that is looking at the future. They're engaging with it, and they're building their strong foresight capabilities. And they can, with intention, start to shape the future. They're not victims anymore. They can identify where they can lean in or where they need to prepare, or what they can avoid, because they can navigate that path and get people there. And then the 5th level is a person who becomes a conscious futurist. This is a person who is demonstrating a high level of futures literacy. They can read the future. They're intentional about creating it. They're comfortable with uncertainty. They are able to integrate these signals into strategic insight, into proper reactions, and they're skilled at shaping a preferred future. So they don't just name things, they can actually shape the future. And that's not an illusion. We can actually shape the future. So those 5 personas are really interesting to look at. And like I said, in the assessment, if you've done it already, I'll send you an update with these particular levels so that you can see. But there are steps that you can take to move from one to the next so that you can develop those capabilities. But it's also useful to look at those 5 personas and look at the people in your teams. This may not be a public conversation with them yet, depending on your circumstances, but it would be interesting to sit with the people in your team and try and work out where they stand at those different levels. Because if you are in a leadership position or in a position of influence, then you want to be able to encourage everybody in the team to develop what they need to so that they can embrace the future better. So it's quite a bit of interesting information, lots of good research and content behind that. So there is an invitation to you that there are a number of resources. There is the assessment that I've referred to, and I will share a bunch of links at the end, but I will also share an email later on that will have these links if you haven't done them yet. So the assessment is just 21 questions so that you can look at those 7 competencies and get a bit of an idea. I'm just going to pop all of these into the chat box for you right now. I can find that. It's a whole bunch of links for you. All right. There's also something that I'm starting next week on the 1st of April is 21 days of these micro learning videos. And this is something that's come out of the mastermind that Bruce and I are in with 2 others. And Ian Hatton, a colleague of ours, has been doing these micro learning videos for someone. And so I thought I would experiment with them as well. And it's really interesting to be able to take such a big, dense topic and bring it down to something small and be able to release it once a day so that people's brains are just primed with that little bit of information, not a huge burden of having to learn and deal with a lot of content, but a little bit of information so that your brain is now looking for that information. So please sign up if you're interested in that. That's off the website. There's no charge for that. There's also a book on this topic that goes into a bit more detail and talks about some other examples of those competencies and how they play out. So I talk about, for example, in terms of ethical decision making, we look at the country of Bhutan, who opted out of the global gross domestic product measurements and rankings and said, we're never going to be able to measure up there. And that's not important to us. Those global KPIs are not relevant to our country. To be ethical to the land and to the people, they developed the gross happiness index. And it's not just a feel-good index, it's actually measurable. And they can measure it year on year and see if they're improving in terms of running an ethical country. I think that is just absolutely stunning. So there's some stories in there, and you can get the books on Amazon or on other platforms from Draft to Digital. And then if any of you are wanting to play around with content and really explore it and play with the different models, I have a monthly group coaching program called Future Coach Sandbox. And it's where futures thinking comes to play. And we come together, there are other coaches and consultants in there at the moment, and it's interesting having them bring in their models that they use in their work. And so we talk about a futures model, and then we see how it relates to other work, and we see how we can make this apply for the sake of our clients. Because those of us who are coaches and clients, we also don't want to add that layer of burden of learning a whole new thing for our clients. So how can we learn something to integrate into the coaching that can help them? So I do a lot of that kind of work, coaching workshops, keynotes, training design, and train the trainer on this content. But my real invitation to you is to realize that the future that we experience is co-created. It's not applied to us. We co-create it together, but only by those who are intentional about the future. If we're not intentional about what we are doing, then the future will be applied to us by other people who've got their own agenda and where we are the products, not the beneficiaries of the future. So have more futures conversations, learn those futures competencies, develop what you need to be able to embrace and shape the future, and find people to co-create it with, that you can aim towards something that you would prefer to live in, that you and your family and your loved ones would prefer to live in. That's the future that we want to create. And that's the reason that I do this work.